The marketplace smelled like 1,000 different worlds mixed together. David Walsh pushed through the crowd of aliens, haggling over strange fruits and glowing crystals. His work shift had ended an hour ago, but he took the long way home through the lower districts. Anything to avoid the empty silence of his quarters that a flash of copper caught his eye near the far wall. David stopped walking. Between two vendor stalls sat the smallest dragon he had ever seen. The little creature couldn't have been more than 4 years old, sitting cross-legged on a dirty blanket with a handful of items spread before him. His scales were dull, like they hadn't been properly oiled in weeks. Bright amber eyes watched the passing crowd with desperate hope. David moved closer, pretending to examine a nearby fruit stand. The dragon hatchling held up a broken music box to a tall insectoid alien. His voice was so quiet David barely heard it. "Please, sir. Only 5 credits. It still plays music if you wind it carefully." The insectoid made a clicking sound that might have been laughter and walked away. The little dragon's shoulders sagged. He carefully placed the music box back on the blanket next to a faded picture book and a small wooden ship with a broken mast. An elderly reptilian merchant at the neighboring stall noticed David watching. She leaned toward him, speaking in the common trade language. "Don't waste your sympathy on that one. Been here 3 weeks now. Abandoned by his own clan." David felt something twist in his chest. 3 weeks? Where does he sleep? Ventilation shafts, probably. Dragon hatchlings are tough. If he can't survive on his own, well, that's their way. The merchant shrugged her scaled shoulders. "No one else will take him. Dragons don't do charity, and most species won't touch a dishonored hatchling. Bad luck, they say." David looked back at the child. The hatchling was trying to smooth out wrinkles in his blanket with small clawed hands. Every movement spoke of hunger and exhaustion, but he sat up straight, maintaining what little dignity he had left. A group of young aliens walked past, pointing and laughing. One kicked dirt onto the blanket. The dragon hatchling flinched but said nothing. He carefully brushed the dirt away from his precious few belongings that David's feet moved before his mind caught up. He crossed the remaining distance and knelt down in front of the blanket. The little dragon looked up at him with wide eyes. "Hello," David said gently. "What's your name?" The hatchling blinked in surprise. Most people didn't ask his name. "Pip, sir. Would you like to buy something?" "Everything is good quality." David picked up the music box. It was old and scratched, the kind of toy a child might treasure. The winding mechanism was bent, but when he turned it carefully, a soft melody played for a few seconds before stopping. "How much?" David asked. 5 credits. Pip's voice tried to sound confident, but David heard the tremor in it. David pulled out his credit chip. "I'll give you 50. Pip's eyes went huge. "But sir, that's too much." It's worth 50 to me," David said firmly. He transferred the credits and tucked the music box into his jacket pocket. "When did you last eat?" Pip's claws curled into small fists. I'm fine." It was obviously a lie. The hatchling's ribs showed through his scales, and his tail was wrapped tightly around his body like he was trying to take up less space in the world. David stood up slowly, not wanting to scare him. "Well, I hope you have a good evening, Pip." He walked away, but stopped at a food vendor 2 stalls down. He watched from the corner of his eye as Pip carefully counted the credits 3 times, like he couldn't believe they were real. Then the little dragon gathered his remaining items into a small cloth bundle and walked to a different vendor. Pip bought a container of basic nutrient paste, the cheapest food available. He sat back down on his blanket and ate with the kind of desperate speed that said he hadn't had a proper meal in days. He scraped the container clean with 1 claw, then licked it to get every last bit. When the food was gone, Pip carefully folded his blanket and tucked his bundle of belongings against the wall. He curled up on the cold floor nearby, tail wrapped around himself, using the blanket as a thin cover. David felt his heart break. The child was alone in a station full of thousands, and no one cared. He thought about his own daughter, gone now for 5 years. She would have been about 8 years old. He thought about the empty room in his quarters that he still couldn't bring himself to change. The crowd thinned as station's lights dimmed to simulate night cycle. Pip's eyes were closed, but his breathing was too quick for real sleep. Every time someone walked past, the little dragon tensed, ready to grab his belongings and run. David turned away and headed home. But back in his quarters, he couldn't stop thinking about amber eyes filled with fear and hope. He pulled out his datapad and started searching the station database. Dragon hatchling care, nutritional requirements, social development, cultural practices. The more he read, the angrier he became. Dragons believed in survival of the fittest. Hatchlings who couldn't keep up were left behind. It was their way, their culture, their tradition, but David was human. And humans had different traditions. That he looked at the music box sitting on his desk, playing its broken melody. Tomorrow he would go back to the marketplace. Tomorrow he would check on the small copper-scaled child who was trying so hard to survive alone. Tomorrow, and every day after that. Pip was trying to sell his picture book when a human came back. The hatchling recognized him immediately. It was hard to forget someone who had paid 50 credits for a broken music box. David carried a warm container that smelled like real food, not the cheap nutrient paste Pip had been surviving on. The human sat down on the floor beside the blanket without asking permission. "I bought too much lunch," David said, setting the container down. "Hate to waste it. You interested?" Pip's stomach growled loudly. His cheeks flushed darker copper with embarrassment. "I don't take charity. Not charity. I'm just bad at estimating portions." David opened the container. Steam rose from seasoned vegetables and actual protein chunks. "Help me out here." Pip hesitated for only a second before his hunger won. He ate slower this time, trying to maintain some dignity. The food was warm and flavorful, so different from the bland paste he'd been choking down. He hadn't realized how much he missed real meals. David didn't talk much while Pip ate. He just sat there, watching the crowd go by. It was comfortable somehow. When Pip finished, David produced a second smaller container with sweet fruit pieces. Pip's eyes went wide. "Dessert," David explained. "Also bought too much." This became their pattern. Every day after his shift, David would show up with food he claimed was extra. Sometimes it was hot soup, sometimes protein bars and dried fruit. Always something different, always more than Pip had eaten in weeks before David appeared. Other humans started noticing. One woman with kind eyes stopped David on the 5th day. "You know, dragons don't bond like we do," she said quietly. "They don't form attachments. You're wasting your time and credits." David just smiled. "Maybe, but he's a kid who needs help." By the 2nd week, Pip started waiting for David's arrival. He would glance toward the main corridor every few minutes, amber eyes searching. When David appeared, something in the hatchling's expression would lighten just a little. David learned things about Pip during their brief conversations. The hatchling's clan had been traveling traders. They'd stopped at Haven's Rest for repairs. When they left, Pip wasn't with them. No explanation. No would-be. Just gone. "I slowed them down," Pip said one day, voice flat. "I got sick during the journey. Needed extra food and medicine. Dragons don't keep weak hatchlings." "That's not weakness," David said firmly. "That's just being a kid. Kids get sick." Pip looked at him with confusion. "Not dragon kids. We're supposed to be strong from hatching." David wanted to argue, but held back. Cultural differences were complicated. Instead, he changed the subject and taught Pip some basic negotiation tactics. The next day, when a merchant tried to cheat Pip on a sale, the hatchling used David's advice and got a fair price. The pride in his eyes made David's chest feel warm. Pip even laughed once. David had tried to greet him in dragon language and completely butchered the pronunciation. The sound of the hatchling's laughter was rusty, like he hadn't used it in a long time. But it was real. 3 weeks after their first meeting, a massive storm hit the station. Power fluctuated wildly. Lights flickered on and off. The environmental systems struggled to maintain stability. Station security ordered everyone to shelter in place. David waited in his quarters, but his mind wouldn't rest. Where was Pip? The lower marketplace would be freezing without proper power. The ventilation shafts where Pip slept would be even worse. He grabbed a thermal blanket and emergency light, then headed into the corridors despite the warnings. Other residents thought he was crazy. David didn't care. He searched the marketplace first. Pip's blanket spot was empty, items scattered by wind from the failing air systems. Panic set in. David searched faster, calling Pip's name. Other people stared but didn't help. Why would they? Just another abandoned dragon hatchling. Not their problem. David found him in a maintenance shaft behind the food vendors. Pip was curled into the smallest ball possible, shivering violently. His small clawed hands clutched the wooden ship to his chest. Tears streaked his face, though he was clearly trying to stop them. Dragons weren't supposed to cry. Pip. David's voice was gentle. I've got you. The hatchling looked up. When he saw David, something inside him broke. All the walls he'd built to survive alone came crashing down. Pip reached for him with a desperate sound that wasn't quite words. David scooped him up carefully, wrapping the thermal blanket around the small, shaking body. Pip buried his face against David's shoulder and sobbed. The sound was heartbreaking. How long had this child been holding everything inside? It's okay, David whispered, carrying Pip through the dark corridors toward his quarters. I've got you. You're safe now. Pip clung to him like David was the only solid thing in a collapsing universe. By the time they reached David's home, the hatchling had cried himself into exhausted silence. David settled him on the couch, piling blankets around him. Pip's eyes were already closing. Don't leave, Pip whispered, the words barely audible. I'm not going anywhere, David promised. He sat beside the couch while Pip fell into the first deep sleep he'd had in months. The storm raged outside, but inside David's quarters, a small copper dragon was finally warm and safe. David looked at the sleeping child and made a decision. This couldn't continue. Pip couldn't keep living on the street, selling his precious few belongings just to survive another day. Something had to change. Tomorrow, he would ask Pip a very important question. Tonight, he would just let the exhausted hatchling rest. Sunlight through the window woke Pip. Real sunlight, not the harsh artificial lights of the marketplace. He blinked in confusion, then remembered. The storm, the human finding him, being carried somewhere warm. Pip sat up carefully. The blankets around him were soft and clean. The room smelled like cooking food. His stomach immediately reminded him it was hungry again. David appeared in the doorway holding 2 plates. Morning. Thought you might be hungry. Pip stared at the actual breakfast. Eggs. Toast. Real food served on actual plates. Why are you doing this? David sat down in a nearby chair. Because you need help. Eat up. They ate in silence. Pip kept glancing around the quarters. There were pictures on the walls. Books on shelves. A small potted plant by the window. Things that made a place a home instead of just a room. When breakfast was done, David leaned forward with his hands clasped. Pip, I want to ask you something important. You can say no, but I want you to think about it carefully. Pip's heart started beating faster. Okay, would you like to stay here with me? Just for a while, until we figure things out. The words hung in the air. Pip's first instinct was to refuse. Dragons didn't accept charity. Dragons didn't live with other species. Dragons survived on their own or not at all. But Pip was so tired of being alone. So tired of being cold and hungry and scared. The thought of going back to that blanket in the marketplace made his chest hurt. My clan said I was too weak, Pip whispered. They said I would never be a proper dragon. If I accept help, it proves they were right. David shook his head. It proves you're smart enough to accept a hand when it's offered. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Other dragons would be ashamed of me. I'm not other dragons. And I think you're pretty brave for surviving this long alone. David's voice was gentle but firm. You don't have to decide right now. But the offer stands. A warm bed, regular meals, safety, for as long as you need it. Pip looked down at his claws. They were dirty and scratched from weeks on the streets. He thought about the ventilation shaft where he'd been sleeping. He thought about the fear that followed him everywhere. Then he thought about David searching for him during the storm when no one else cared. Just for a while? Pip asked quietly. Just for a while, David agreed, though something in his eyes suggested he hoped for longer. That afternoon, David took Pip to the medical center. Dr. Reeves was a human woman with gray hair and gentle hands. She examined Pip carefully, asking questions about his health history. Severe malnutrition, she told David while Pip sat on the exam table. Several minor infections. Dehydration, but nothing that can't be fixed with proper care and nutrition. She turned to Pip with a smile. You're going to be fine, sweetheart. Sweetheart. The word made Pip's chest feel strange. warm and confused at the same time. That evening, David's neighbors came to visit. Other humans from the colony brought food and supplies. They fussed over Pip, asking questions and offering help. One man brought children's books. A woman brought a heat lamp, explaining that dragon hatchlings needed extra warmth. Pip was overwhelmed by the attention. Dragons didn't gather like this, didn't share freely, didn't smile at strangers' children, and offer help without expecting something in return. It was bizarre and wonderful and terrifying all at once. At the tea dinner, David invited 2 other human families to join them. The children were excited to meet Pip, asking endless questions about dragons and flying and breathing fire. Pip explained he was too young for fire yet, which made the kids even more curious. They ate together at one big table, passing dishes and laughing and talking over each other. It was chaos. Pip had never experienced anything like it. Dragon meals were quiet, orderly affairs where hatchlings ate after the adults finished. But this was different. The human children grabbed food first. Adults served them with smiles. Everyone talked at once, telling stories and making jokes. One little girl spilled her drink, and instead of punishment, her mother just laughed and cleaned it up. After dinner, David showed Pip to a small room. It had a bed with a thick mattress, soft blankets, the heat lamp glowing warm in the corner, shelves ready for belongings, though Pip only had his cloth bundle with a picture book and wooden ship. "This is yours," David said, "for as long as you're here." Pip touched the blankets with one claw. "Why do you care about me? I am nobody," a failed dragon hatchling that even his own family didn't want. David knelt down, so they were eye level. His expression was sad and understanding at the same time. 5 years ago, I had a daughter. She was 6 years old. There was an accident on our colony transport. I lost her and my wife in the same day. Pip's eyes went wide. "I am sorry." "Me too. For a long time, I was just going through the motions of living. Working, eating, sleeping, but not really alive." David reached out slowly, giving Pip time to pull away. When he didn't, David gently touched the top of the hatchling's head. Then I saw a small dragon trying to sell a broken music box, and something in me woke up. "You reminded me that there's still good I can do in this universe. That caring for others is what makes us who we are. I don't understand humans," Pip said softly. David smiled. "That's okay. You don't have to understand. You just have to let yourself be cared for. Can you do that?" Pip thought about his clan leaving without him, thought about the cold nights and empty stomach, thought about David searching for him in the storm. He thought about the word sweetheart and the warmth in this human's eyes. "I can try," Pip whispered. That night, Pip slept in a real bed for the first time in his life. The official summons arrived 3 weeks later. Pip was eating breakfast when David's communication device chimed. The human read the message, and his face went carefully blank. "What's wrong?" Pip asked, setting down his spoon. David hesitated. "There's going to be a hearing about you staying with me. The station council wants to review the guardianship arrangement." The food in Pip's stomach turned to stone. "They're going to send me away. No one is sending you anywhere." David's voice was firm. "We'll figure this out together." But Pip had already heard the whispers around the station. Other dragons were angry that a hatchling was living with humans. They said David was corrupting dragon culture, teaching weakness, making Pip soft. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Pip spent those days in a state of quiet terror. He tried not to show it, but David noticed anyway. Humans were strange like that. They paid attention to feelings. 2 days before the hearing, Pip overheard David talking to Dr. Reeves in the next room. "They're going to take him," David said, voice tight with worry. "The dragon representative is demanding he be sent to one of their orphanages. Says I'm destroying his cultural identity. You've given him a home, health, happiness. I know, but to them, that's exactly the problem. Dragons believe hatchlings need hardship to become strong. They think I'm making him weak." Pip pressed himself against the wall, heart pounding. They were right, weren't they? He was weak. That's why his clan left him. Living with David had only proven it. He ate regular meals now, slept in a warm bed, felt safe. All things that made him less dragon and more of whatever confused thing he was becoming. That night, Pip barely slept. When morning came, He was withdrawn and quiet. David tried to cheer him up with his favorite breakfast foods, but Pip just pushed them around his plate. The hearing room was intimidating. Council members from 6 different species sat at a curved table. Station Administrator Quillen presided over the proceedings with his insectoid compound eyes watching everything. The dragon representative was named Torval. He was massive, with dark green scales and cold yellow eyes. He stood with perfect posture, radiating disapproval. "This human has interfered with dragon cultural practices," Torval began. The hatchling was undergoing a traditional survivability test. His clan determined he was not fit to continue with them. "This is our way. It has been our way for thousands of years." Quillen's antenna twitched. "Mr. Walsh, you filed for temporary guardianship. Explain your position." David stood, holding Pip's small clawed hand. Pip wasn't undergoing a test. He was abandoned, left alone on a space station with no resources, no support, and no one checking if he survived. That's not a test. That's just cruelty dressed up as culture. Torval's eyes narrowed. "You dare judge our traditions." "I judge any tradition that leaves a 4-year-old child to starve in the streets," David said calmly. "Strength isn't just about surviving alone. Sometimes real strength is building communities that protect the vulnerable." Other council members murmured among themselves. The representative from the insectoid colony spoke up. "This seems to be an internal dragon matter. Should we intervene?" A human representative named Patricia stood. "We should absolutely intervene. We're talking about a child's welfare. If this were a human child, we'd never tolerate such treatment. Why should we have different standards for other species?" "Because different species have different needs," Torval countered. "Dragons require challenge to develop properly. Your human softness will destroy what makes him dragon." David squeezed Pip's hand gently. "Why don't we ask Pip what he wants?" All eyes turned to the small copper dragon. Pip wanted to disappear, wanted to hide. But David had taught him that being scared didn't mean you couldn't be brave. He stood up on shaky legs. "I tried to survive alone," Pip said, voice barely above a whisper. "I sold everything I had. I went hungry. I was cold and scared every day. If that's what being a proper dragon means, then I don't want to be one." Torval looked at him with something like pity. "You see, the human has already corrupted him. This is exactly why he must be removed and placed in proper care." "Proper care." Pip's voice grew stronger. "I was dying. David saved me. He gave me food and warmth and safety. He taught me I have value even when I'm not perfect." "How is that corruption?" "Because it teaches you weakness," Torval said flatly. "Life is harsh. The galaxy is dangerous. Dragons who cannot survive hardship become liabilities." David spoke again, his voice steady. "I've watched Pip grow stronger every day in my care. He's learning, growing, developing skills. But he's doing it with support instead of in spite of its absence. That doesn't make him weak. It makes him balanced." The council deliberated for what felt like hours. Pip sat beside David, trying not to cry. Dragons didn't cry. But lately, Pip had been crying more often. David said it was healthy to express emotions. But what if Torval was right? What if David was turning him into something that couldn't survive in the real world? Finally, Quillen spoke. "This council cannot make a final determination today. We grant an extension of temporary guardianship for 3 more months while we investigate further. Mr. Walsh, you will continue caring for Pip during this time. Torval, your concerns are noted, but we need more evidence before making a permanent decision." It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't defeat either. David and Pip left the hearing room together. Outside, David knelt down and pulled Pip into a hug. "I won't let them take you," David whispered. "I promise." Pip wanted to believe him. But that night, wrapped in his warm blankets in his safe room, he had nightmares about being sent away. He woke up crying and ran to David's room. David was already awake, like he'd been waiting. He lifted the blankets without a word, and Pip climbed into bed beside him. 3 months passed like water flowing downhill. Pip barely noticed time moving because he was too busy living. For the first time in his young life, he had routines that felt good instead of scary. Mornings meant breakfast with David. The human always made sure Pip ate enough, packing extra snacks for later. Then came school at the human colony's education center. At first, Pip had been terrified, but the teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was patient and kind. The other children accepted him without question, like having a dragon classmate was the most natural thing in the universe. Pip learned to read better, learn mathematics and history, learn about different planets and species. The human children asked him to teach them dragon words, and Pip found he liked being the expert for once that he made friends. A human girl named Amy who loved drawing. A boy named Robert who collected rocks from different worlds. They invited Pip to play during recreation time, never making him feel different or wrong. After school, Pip would wait in the corridor for David to finish his maintenance shift. Then they'd walk home together, Pip chattering about his day, while David listened with genuine interest. No adult had ever cared about Pip's thoughts before. Evenings were for homework, which David helped with even though human mathematics confused him sometimes. Then dinner, often with neighbors joining. The human community had adopted Pip as one of their own. People brought him small gifts, asked about his day, remembered his favorite foods. Pip was healthier now. His scales had regained their shine. He gained weight. Dr. Reeves said he was developing exactly as a dragon hatchling should, just with better nutrition and care than most received. But the upcoming final hearing loomed over everything like a dark cloud. David tried to hide his worry, but Pip could feel it. The human spent his evenings preparing documents, gathering testimonies, building a case for permanent guardianship. One night, while David was tucking him in a bed, Pip asked the question that had been bothering him for weeks. What if I don't want to be a dragon anymore? David sat on the edge of the bed, his face serious. What do you mean? Dragons are supposed to be tough, independent, strong enough to survive alone. I'm not any of those things. Pip pulled the blanket tighter. Maybe Torval is right. Maybe I'm broken. You're not broken. You're 4 years old. You're supposed to need help and support. That's what being a kid means. Dragon kids are different. David was quiet for a moment. Pip, being dragon is part of who you are. Your scales, your heritage, your culture. I would never want you to lose that. But culture should serve people, not hurt them. If dragon traditions say you're worthless because you needed help, then those traditions are wrong. But what am I supposed to be? Not a proper dragon. Not human. Just something confused in the middle. David smiled gently. You're Pip. You're smart and brave and kind. You're learning to read and making friends and healing from hard times. That's enough. That's more than enough. Pip thought about this while David turned off the light. In the darkness, he whispered, David, can I call you Dad? The silence stretched. Then David's voice came back, rough with emotion. I would be honored. The word felt right in Pip's mouth. Dad, not David the human, not David the guardian. Just Dad. 2 weeks before the final hearing, something unexpected happened. 3 more dragon hatchlings appeared at the human colony's community center. They were thin and scared, recently abandoned by their own clans. Word had spread about the human who took in a dragon child. David didn't hesitate. He organized the human community to help. Families opened their homes. Dr. Reeves provided medical care. Mrs. Patterson enrolled the hatchlings in school. Pip watched it happen with wonder. This was what humans did. They saw someone in need and helped, not because they had to, but because they wanted to, because they believed everyone deserved kindness. The dragon hatchlings were wary at first, just like Pip had been. But slowly, they started to relax, started to play, started to believe they might be safe. Pip helped them adjust, sharing what he'd learned. He taught them which foods humans liked to cook, showed them how to ask for help without feeling ashamed, explained that crying wasn't weakness, just a way to let out big feelings. One of the new hatchlings, a small blue dragon named Sky, clung to Pip like a younger sibling. Does it get easier? She asked one day. Pip thought about his first weeks with David, the fear and confusion, the slow building of trust. Yeah, he said finally. It gets easier. The humans make it easier. When the final hearing arrived, the council room was packed. David had arranged for multiple witnesses. Mrs. Patterson testified about Pip's academic progress and social development. Dr. Reeves presented medical records showing dramatic health improvements. Several human families spoke about how their own children had benefited from learning alongside dragon hatchlings. Pip himself stood before the council and spoke clearly. I know I'm different from other dragons. I know I don't fit the traditional way, but I'm happy. I'm healthy. I'm learning and growing. David hasn't destroyed my dragon heritage. He's given me space to figure out what kind of dragon I want to be. Torval listened to everything with an unreadable expression. When it was his turn to speak, he stood slowly. 3 months ago, I believed this human was corrupting our young, Torval began. Everyone tensed. I believed our traditional methods were the only correct path. But I have observed what happened here. 4 abandoned hatchlings, all thriving under human care, all maintaining their dragon identity while learning new ways to be strong. He looked directly at Pip. Perhaps strength comes in many forms. Perhaps survival and thriving are not the same thing. Perhaps we dragons have been so focused on hardship that we forgot about growth. The council chamber went silent. Torval turned to Quillen. I withdraw my objection. Let the human keep his child. The council's decision was unanimous. David Walsh received full legal guardianship of Pip, with rights to formally adopt once the paper were processed. When Quillen announced the ruling, Pip felt something inside his chest release. A fear he'd been carrying for so long finally let go. David hugged him right there in the council chamber, not caring who watched. Pip hugged back, his small claws gripping David's shirt. Around them, the human witnesses cheered. Even some of the other species representatives smiled. Torval approached them after the formal proceedings ended. Up close, the large dragon was even more intimidating. Pip instinctively moved behind David's legs, but Torval's voice was gentler than before. Young one, may I speak with you? Pip looked up at David, who nodded encouragingly. Pip stepped forward, trying to be brave. Torval lowered himself to be closer to Pip's height. I came here believing I knew what strength meant. That independence was the only measure of worth. Your human father taught me I was wrong. He's good at teaching, Pip said quietly. Indeed, Torval's yellow eyes studied Pip carefully. You survived alone when your clan abandoned you. That took strength. But accepting help when it was offered, that took even greater courage. I was wrong to call you weak. Pip felt tears starting and tried to stop them. Dragons didn't cry in public. But Torval surprised him by continuing. Our people have practiced abandonment for generations, telling ourselves it builds character. But perhaps it only builds loneliness. Perhaps there are better ways. Torval stood tall again. You have found a different kind of strength, young Pip. I hope you will prove me right about that. With that, Torval left. David placed a hand on Pip's shoulder. You okay? David asked. Pip nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. They walked home together through the station corridors. Pip's clawed hand tucked safely in David's larger one. That evening, David made Pip's favorite dinner. Halfway through the meal, he pulled out an official document. This is the adoption paperwork, David explained. Once it's filed, you'll legally be my son. Not just guardianship, actual family. Your name will be Pip Walsh if you want it. Pip traced the letters of his new name with one claw. Will I still be dragon? You'll always be dragon. This just means you're also family. Both things at once. I like both things at once, Pip decided. They signed the papers together, David's signature in human script and Pip's careful mark beneath it. It felt important, and right 6 months later, their home had changed. 2 of the other abandoned dragon hatchlings, Sky and Finn, had been adopted by different human families in the colony. The third, an older hatchling named Ridge, was staying with David and Pip while they searched for the right permanent placement. The human quarters had been modified to accommodate dragon needs. Heat lamps in every room, reinforced furniture, a small collection of dragon heritage books that David had purchased so the hatchlings could learn their own history. Pip attended school regularly now, consistently earning high marks. His teacher said he had a gift for helping other students, especially ones who felt different or struggled to fit in. Pip understood what it meant to not belong. He used that understanding to help others feel welcome. David's quarters became a gathering place. Other families visited regularly. Human children played with dragon hatchlings. Adults shared meals and stories. It was chaotic and warm and full of life. One afternoon, Pip was helping Ridge with homework when a younger dragon asked, "Do you ever miss your old clan?" Pip thought about it carefully. Sometimes I wonder what happened to them. If they ever thought about me. but I don't miss being with them. They didn't want me. David wants you, Ridge said. That's better. Yeah, Pip agreed with a smile. That's much better. That night, Pip had his regular video call with Mrs. Patterson to discuss an upcoming school project. After they finished, David appeared in the doorway. Got something to show you, David said. Looking excited, he led Pip to the small balcony attached to their quarters. The station's viewing porch showed the stars beyond, endless and bright. David had set up 2 chairs and warm blankets. They sat together, looking out at space. David pointed out different star systems, telling Pip stories about the colonies and worlds that orbited them. You know what I think about sometimes? David said quietly. If I hadn't walked through that marketplace that day, if I'd taken a different route home, we wouldn't have met, Pip said, right? And my life would still be empty, just going through motions. David put his arm around Pip's shoulders. You saved me as much as I saved you. Pip leaned against David's side, feeling safe and warm. I'm glad you're a human. Oh yeah? Why is that? Because dragons don't do this. Don't keep kids who struggle. Don't make families out of strangers. Don't believe people have value just because they exist. Pip looked up at the stars. Humans are weird like that. In a good way. David laughed. We are pretty weird, but it works for us. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars turn slowly beyond the viewing port. Pip thought about the small copper dragon who used to sell broken toys on a dirty blanket. That hatchling had been so alone, so desperate, so convinced he was worthless. Now, that same hatchling had a father who loved him, had friends who accepted him, had a community that protected him, had a future full of possibilities instead of just survival. Dad, Pip said softly. Yeah, buddy. Thank you for not walking past that day. David pulled him closer. Best decision I ever made. Below them, in a station marketplace, another lost child wandered alone. But this time, Pip noticed. This time, he tugged David's sleeve and pointed. Together, they went to help, carrying forward the kindness that had saved them both.